Hi, I'm Hannah DeWitt. I'm your instructor for Studio Art and Visual Culture. You already met me in class, but I just wanted to introduce myself again, and this is the first of my pre-recorded lecture series. I wanted to make this pre-recorded lecture series so that you could pause and rewind if you didn't hear me for something, and most importantly, so that you can come back to this later. You could come back to it the night before the exam. You could come back to it a year from now if you just want a refresher, but I just wanted to make these as a resource to you that you can always have to look back on. So before I get started, I just wanted to say this lecture series is somewhat based on, it's based on, but I also stray from the book a bit, from Preble's Art Forms, which is the book for this class that I'm not requiring, but it is structured like the book. Also, I'm getting a lot of inspiration from one of my brilliant cohorts who also made a pre-recorded lecture series. Their name is Erica Lewis, and I'm going to link their YouTube down below because they also have a pre-recorded lecture series for this same class, and theirs is wonderful. And I just wanted to give credit where credit is due. I am definitely taking inspiration from them. So with that being said, let's get started. Today's lecture is on chapters 1 and 2. So chapter 1 is the nature of art and creativity. Also, I'd like to kind of just warn you that the first few chapters of this might seem a bit dry, or like a bit of the things that I'm telling you might be intuitive because a lot of people already kind of know the reasons that people make art or the nature of creativity and things like that. But that's just because we're starting at the really bare bones basics and building from there. So just bear with me. It'll get a lot more interesting as the class develops. But let's start from the very beginning. So I wanted to start off with this slide that has two very famous art pieces on it, and they are very famous for very different reasons. So this first, on the left, you'll see the creation of Adam, which is a part of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. It is fresco, and it is very famous. Michelangelo is definitely considered one of the old masters, and it demonstrates a ridiculous amount of technical skill, a ridiculous amount of training that it went into being able to create something just so realistically, like the anatomy and the colors and everything. There's just so much that went into this. You can only imagine the amount of years training that went behind this. And then to the right, you'll see this piece is called Comedian, and it is by Marzio Catalan. And I'd also like to give a disclaimer here at the beginning. I am so sorry if I mispronounce any names of anything throughout this. I'm trying my best, but I'm also only human, and I also have a bit of a book education where a lot of things I have only read and not actually heard spoken to me out loud, so I might mispronounce something, and I'm so sorry in advance for that. This piece on the right is very famous for a very different reason. It definitely didn't take a lot of technical skill or training to create this. It's literally a banana duct taped to a wall, and it was for sale for over $1 million, which is part of what the outrage was around this, and part of what made it so famous. But even further than that, someone actually came up and ate the banana, and that went absolutely viral on the internet, taking the art world and also just the internet in general by storm. And you could say that this act of the viewer eating the banana is an act of performance art in and of itself. You could say it's an act of protest against the price of the piece or the institution in which it is and how things like this are able to be priced so high. Or you could just say that it's completely an act of vandalism. That person definitely got in trouble. But so these are two artworks that are very famous for very different reasons. And I just wanted to start off with them contrasting each other, so we can use these as examples for our first few kind of explanations as to, well, first of all, let's get into what is art. And this is, like I said, this might seem a bit intuitive, but just to start at the basics, art generally refers to music, theater, literature, visual arts, And visual arts includes drawing, painting, sculpture, film, architecture, design, and more. Art can be any of these things, or it can be more. The general consensus is that if you insist that it is art and somehow put it into a gallery or a museum in which the institution has the authority to confirm that it is indeed art, then it is art no matter what it is. That is how the banana duct tape to the wall ended up being considered art, because someone had the authority to say it was. And that's something that I'd like to have us think about in this class, is who has the authority to say that certain things are art, and where does this authority come from? And also, maybe we should question this authority a bit. But also art communicates meaning beyond verbal exchange, although some of it includes verbal exchange like dialogue in theater or literature, but we're specifically focusing on visual art in this class. So moving on, a work of art is the visual expression of an idea or experience formed with skill through the use of a medium. And you might ask, what is a medium? Well, a medium is a particular material along with its accompanying technique, and the plural of this is media. So the medium is chosen by an artist to enforce the function of the work. And for some examples to help you understand, for the creation of Adam, the medium is fresco, which is a type of painting technique where you're quite literally painting onto or into the wall with what the wall itself is made of, so that the painting is inseparable from the wall itself. It won't chip off like paint could over time. It makes it very permanent. And also, for the comedian, the medium is a banana. One could argue that the medium is interdisciplinary sculpture, but the medium used for the comedian is a banana. So you can see mediums can be either traditional materials or modern avant-garde materials, untraditional materials. Also, mixed media describes art that's created with a combination of materials. So if you were to see a sculpture that had plaster and clay and wire and resin and paint on the outside and glitter or something and popsicle sticks, if it combines a ton of different, or not even a ton, but if it blurs the lines between mediums and uses a bunch of different mediums at once, that is considered mixed media. So moving on, what is creativity? Now that's a bit hard to pin down, but the book wants me to tell you this, so I'm going to tell you this. Creativity is the ability to bring forth something new that has value. The thing that you bring forth has relevance or brings a new way of thinking. It's not just a novelty. And also, a work of creativity has the potential to influence future thought or action. There are 5 traits that define creativity, or that one uses in the creative process, and those are associating, questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting. And also, visual creativity is what we're mainly going to be focusing on this class, which is the use of imagery to communicate, once again, beyond words, beyond the power of what words alone can do. So let's look at an example of something very creative. So this is He Got Game by Robin Road. It's just a series of photographs, but you can see the camera it's taking photos from a bird's eye view, and the artist is laying on the ground and has a chalk drawing. So because he's actually laying on the ground, he's able to do things that he wouldn't actually be able to do with a real basketball hoop. So this just shows that visual creativity can be used, you can just use simple means for this. This is very low technology. It's just a chalk drawing of a basketball hoop. And in it, the artist imitates slow motion photography and performs an impossible flip. Like I said, something that he wouldn't be able to do if it were a real basketball goal. And this, I think, just goes to show that creativity is an attitude. You don't have to have all of the best resources in the world or all of the highest level technology to make something very creative. This is just chalk and a camera and a basketball and imagination. So moving forward, this is a photo montage, or more recently people have taken to calling photo montages collages. And this is Prevalence of Ritual Tidings by Romer Bearden. So this consists of picture fragments that are pasted together, and the symbolism behind it suggests Christian Annunciation. I actually don't know much about the tradition of Annunciation itself, but apparently something about the forlorn woman holding the flower has something to do with Annunciation. But more importantly than that, just thinking about the motive of the artist in making this piece. The artist is concerned with both effectiveness of communication to the viewer, so how well the viewer can pick up what they're putting down. Honestly, I don't think that this is communicating very effectively to me about Annunciation, but that just might be because of my lack of knowledge of that tradition. But also, the artist is working with an inner need for creative expression that's equally important to the effectiveness of communication. So the artist had something inside that they wanted to express, and that's the function of this artwork. Moving on, I just want to touch on trained versus untrained artists. Now, this is a subject that it's a distinction that can get a bit lofty, a bit exclusionary, a bit gatekeepy, and I'd like to challenge the idea that artists have to have a specific type of formal training. Not that there's not value to an arts education. I mean, I'm working towards becoming an arts educator myself, but I think that we shouldn't be excluding people from the artistic community because of lack of arts education. So we all have the potential to be creative. As far as what training looks like for artists, in the past, people used to do apprenticeships. Nowadays, people usually go to art school or an art program within their college or university. And also, once again, I'd like to point out that this training is not always necessary. So folk artists, on the other hand, are considered naive or, quote, outsider artists with little or no formal training. These people are self-taught and they are able to create amazing things, sometimes much more creative than those that are traditionally trained because they're thinking outside of the boxes that our educational system puts us into. But if you hear someone talking about an outsider artist, that's what they mean, is that this artist didn't go to art school, didn't have an apprenticeship, they're self-taught. So the term outsider artists is what people normally say for that. So let's look at a piece of, quote, outsider art. This is one of the best known and largest pieces of outsider art in the United States. It's very impressive. This is Nuestro Pueblo by Sabatino Simon Rodia. And this was made entirely of cast-off materials, found objects, reclaimed, salvaged, things that were either thrown away or left on the street or litter or things like that, which I find so beautifully resourceful considering how much litter and trash that just goes towards destroying the planet instead of being salvaged and creating art out of it. It's so resourceful and creative. And also, this is incredibly impressive because these towers were built without power tools, rivets, welds, or bolts. So the fact that they are structurally sound and still standing to this day is incredibly impressive. And here is a detail shot so that you can see just how much time and care and effort went into the details of this. There's this mosaic all around the surface of it. There's so much to take in here. So, yeah, that is a detail shot of this piece. So it just goes to show that outsider art is not to be looked down on. Now, here's another example of outsider art, and this is outsider art because we don't know who the artist is. We call this person the Philadelphia Wireman. So a while ago, more than 1,000, small, about the size of your hand, sculptures of objects wrapped in wire were found across Philadelphia. People assume that this artist is male. I'd like to challenge that. I wonder why we assume that the creator is likely male. Is it because wire is considered an aggressive or masculine medium to use? Because I think this could likely be a woman as well, but we just don't know because the creator is anonymous. But yeah, this is an outsider artist that has really captured the curiosity of the art community by making so many of these and not taking credit for them. So moving on from that, folk art is another form of not trained artists. They are trained in a different way. It's not institutional training. Oftentimes, folk art is taught through generations by your family. But yeah, folk artists are part of established traditions of style, theme, and craftsmanship. Like I said, they go down through generations. They most have little systematic art training or systemic art training, but they, like I said, are taught. It's just a very different way of teaching. And folk art can take many forms. Some of the most popular are quilts, embroidered handkerchiefs, decorated weather vanes, sculptures, even customized art cars can be considered folk art. So let's look at this quilt. This is Peony by Mary Wallace. Quilting is a very popular form of folk art, and it also has a very social aspect to it. People would gather in sewing circles and work on sewing their quilts together. So there's very much like a relational aspect to this art, which I find quite beautiful. But this, you can see that there's this use of repetition and pattern, and also this sort of mild abstraction of the peony flowers being turned into these like 6-point stars, but you can still tell what they're meant to be. It's really breaking things down into the basic shapes that they are and creating patterns and working with color to make something quite lovely. And also this design specifically shows influence from Pennsylvania German pottery, which was traditional to the region Mary Wallace was working in. Another form of folk art are these retablo paintings, which are usually found in Mexico and the American Southwest. This one, we don't know who the artist is, but a retablo painting is basically a painting on tin that has a sort of built-in frame to it out of that tin. So the artist also metalworks and puts time and care into the framing of the piece as well. And these are generally very Christian, very religious pieces. They usually give thanks to God or depict salvation in some way. So that's another example of folk art, but with a more religious background. Now let's look at representational art. So representational art depicts the appearance of things. So this is a very representational painting of a pipe and tobacco and matches called A Smoke Backstage by William Harnett. And as you can see, it's very realistic. It looks almost like a photograph. And that's the idea of representational art. I mean, it doesn't have to be like completely photographically perfect, but it is meant to look like the actual thing that it's depicting. Figurative art is a form of representational art, but that's when the human form is the primary subject of the artwork. And you might ask what a subject is. A subject of an artwork is the object depicted in representational art. So the subject of this piece is the pipe. Also, there's a tradition of trying to make incredibly hyper-realistic, like looks just like a photograph paintings, and that is called trompe-l'oeil, and that is French for fool the eye. There's just this long tradition of, honestly, artists just flexing at how realistically they can depict something and trying to make you think that it is exactly like you're looking through a window into it instead of at a painting. Moving on, here's another image of a pipe that's very famous. This is The Treachery of Images, or La Trahison des Images, by René Magritte. And underneath the pipe, it says, "Ce n'est pas une pipe," which means this is not a pipe. And the viewer might wonder, if it's not a pipe, what is it? The answer to that is it's a painting of a pipe. It's a picture of a pipe. It's not the real thing. It's just a depiction of it. And so Magritte here is really getting into semiotics and making us wonder, why do we consider depictions of things to be the real thing? This sort of simulacra where the idea of it becomes a replacement for the real object in our minds. It's also just quite playful. But looking onward, here's another work that's based off of The Treachery of Images. So I just wanted to show how artists often use famous artworks as the basis for an artwork, and they're not copying, but instead they're adding something to the conversation. So this is Definitely Not a Pipe by Ray Beldner, and this is clearly referencing Rene Magritte here, but it's made out of cut up and sewn together dollar bills. And that adds a lot to the conversation, I think. I mean, first of all, destroying a dollar bill is supposedly a crime, so there's that. And also, what does it mean to make a very famous artwork out of money? This is about the commodification of artwork or the commodification of images as a whole? Is it about advertising culture? There's a lot to unpack here. So yeah, that is an example of how someone can take a famous artwork and reference it, but add something to the conversation and make it their own. Moving on to abstract art. Excuse me. Abstract art are works that have no reference at all to natural objects or things that exist in the real world. They are works that do depict natural objects, but they're in simplified, distorted, or exaggerated ways so that they could never actually look like that in real life. It might be obvious to the viewer what the artist is trying to depict, or they might need a verbal cue. And also, abstract art is common in many cultures. It's all around the world, people started creating abstract art around the same time. I mean, it's generally said to have been invented by Kandinsky, but I'll actually get into that later. So, this is an example of something that takes something from the real world, in this case, the human figure, or multiple human figures, but abstracts it in a way that it couldn't actually look like that in real life. So this chief's stool shows repeated abstractions of the human form, and it represents the people of the community supporting the chief. Like, they're quite literally, when the chief sits on this stool, they are quite literally supporting the chief's actual body weight. So that is something that comes from real life but is abstracted. And then moving towards pure abstraction, here is Theo van Doesburg's work making a cow into something that is pure abstraction. So Van Doesburg was exploring how far he could simplify a cow while still capturing its essence. If you only looked at the final painting, it would likely be seen as completely non-representational. But when you actually see the progression from the first to the last image, you can see how he got from a point of representational to furthering and becoming more abstracted until he reaches pure abstraction at the end. Also, an artist that I would like to feature is Alma Thomas. She was an abstract painter. You can see one of her paintings here, White Roses Sing and Sing, and also a photograph of her. But I just wanted to feature her. She's quite remarkable. She was inspired by the movement of leaves and flowers under different light, which you can see through this White Roses Sing and Sing painting quite well. But also in a sort of biography of her, she was the first graduate of Howard University's art program in 1924. She taught in a Washington, D.C. junior high school. She was the founding vice president of the first private gallery to show work by artists of all races. And this, I mean, segregation has been a massive issue in all fields, but definitely in the art world as well. So she was definitely paving a new way for a better world there. She devoted herself to art full-time after she retired from teaching, and she had her first solo exhibition at the age of 69. She was also the first African-American to have a solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum, and she always believed that creativity was not bound by race or nation. So that is Alma Thomas. I just wanted to focus in on her a little bit. Also, here is a fun fact that the textbook won't tell you. Kandinsky is oftentimes cited to have invented abstract art, but recent findings have shown that someone named Hilma af Klint made abstract paintings before Kandinsky first invented abstraction. Also, Hilma af Klint and Kandinsky did run in the same social circles, so it is likely that he could have gotten these ideas from her, which is honestly a tale as old as time, a man stealing a woman's ideas and then getting incredibly famous for it. But these are some screenshots from a documentary on her life and work as the first abstract painter. The documentary is titled Beyond the Visible, Hilma af Klint, and it is so good, 10 out of 10, highly recommend. I'm not requiring that you watch it, but if you're looking to see a little bit more about her, she's very, very cool, and it's a great documentary. Moving on to just non-representational art, that is non-objective or non-figurative art. It presents visual forms with no specific references to anything outside of themselves and can come in a wide variety of forms, compositions, moods, and messages that are possible. So, for example, here is a pair of doors from an Egyptian mosque. There are wood carving, and they draw and hold our attention despite not representing anything. So we're really getting into the decorative arts here. Also, here's a more modern example of this. This is Yellow and Black by Carmen Herrera. This is asymmetrical and sleek. It communicates vigorous energy, an agitated state of mind. You almost think of like a lightning bolt or electricity when you look at this. And it might seem more difficult to grasp than non-representational art. So this is definitely the type of work that someone would walk into a modern art museum and be like, I just don't get it. I just don't get why it's art. And that is a common criticism, but it actually does have value to it. It offers a fresh way of seeing a new visual experience. And it is really, even though it is quite simple, it uses visual elements to affect the viewer greatly. So there is merit to this. Also, I wanted to quickly touch on the difference between looking and seeing. So looking is just the physical act of looking at something. It implies taking in what is before us in a mechanical or goal-oriented way. Seeing, on the other hand, is more open, receptive, and focused. You're also looking with your memories, imaginations, and feelings attached. So what you perceive, things can become clouded by your perception and your own experiences and what you bring to the table and can be altered by that. And that's actually an important part of seeing because we all bring something different to the table. So we all sort of see through different glasses, if that makes any sense. And also seeing is appreciating a form beyond just its function alone. So a good example of something that really, an artwork that really focuses on seeing is this gelatin silver print photograph of a pepper called Pepper by Edward Weston. And it really just, you really just take the time to truly look at the delicate curves and lights and shadows of just a pepper, just something that you might not normally focus on. The quality of glowing light in this was created through using a timed exposure of over 2 hours. So the camera was actually taking that picture. You know how you take a picture and it just takes like a second, like less than a second? The one picture taken here took over 2 hours to take that one picture. Also, it's of a seemingly common object, but it's elevated to represent the artist's achievements. So it's very much glorifying how the artist was able to notice and amplify the beauty of something that others would just look over. And it also gives us a sense of wonder about the natural world. Like, like we might just pass this by, but actually this beauty is all around us. Also, moving on, let's get into the difference between form and content and also how they work together. So the form of an artwork is the total effect of the combined visual qualities within the work. So that is the materials used, the colors in it, the shapes, the line, the design itself. All of that adds together to be the form of the work. On the other hand, the content is the message or the meaning behind the work of art. It's what the artist is expressing or communicating to the viewer. Form and content work together. They're inseparable. So content determines form. You choose your form based on what content you want to express. And form is the tool used to express the content. So they really, they go hand in hand. One cannot be executed without the other's help. So here's an example of two artworks that have the same content but very different form. On the left here, you'll see Auguste Rodin's The Kiss, and on the right, you'll see Constantine Brancusi's The Kiss. Now, Rodin's work is representational of Western ideals. There's this highly charged moment of lovers embracing, and it's also demonstrates so much technical skill, so much mastery of anatomy, so much mastery over the medium, over showing how well he can carve the marble itself, like this constant flexing contest that I keep referencing between artists. It's very much in the Western canon's ideals. Whereas for Brancusi, he has manipulated a solid block of stone to represent lasting love. So this is carved out of one stone, and that is symbolic in and of itself of two becoming one. And you can see these two forms are really merging and becoming one form together. But it's abstracted. It clearly doesn't reference natural anatomy, but you still get what it means, and it has a further meaning through the way it is abstracted, because it does show the two becoming one a lot more than Rodin's Kiss does. So this is a good example of two works that have the same content but very different form. Also, seeing and responding to form, basically the artist's role in this is being the sender of the work's message, and the viewer, in order for it to be successful, must receive and experience the work. And learning to respond to form, oftentimes subject matter can interfere with the perception of form. And by that, I mean, when you look at something, let's say a painting of an apple, you immediately recognize it as an apple, and sometimes you might just think, oh, that's an apple, and move on, and not actually look at the delicate balance of colors and light and shadow and the brush strokes and all of the artistic qualities that go into this painting of the apple. You just think, oh, it's an apple. And then so you're kind of blinded from looking at the details of what all went into it. It's like it's like the opposite of can't see the forest through the trees. But a good way to combat this is to actually look at pictures upside down, so that you don't recognize the subject matter anymore, and you're only looking at all of the formal elements that make up the piece, and that makes something that is familiar to you unfamiliar, so that you can really appreciate the form. Someone who's really good at making the familiar unfamiliar and really appreciating the form in that way is Georgia OKeefe. This is Jack in the Pulpit number 5, but Georgia OKeefe makes these paintings often of flowers, but they're very zoomed in, and they're also often these very yonic, very vaginal images, with just the way that the flowers naturally exist in the world. She's bringing that out in them, especially by only focusing on certain parts, so you almost couldn't tell it's a flower at first. But this is enlarged to 4 feet in height, but it is just a small part of the flower, so it's really honing in on looking and truly seeing this part of the flower. And the viewer, because of this, takes the time to observe an object that would normally be too small for them to notice. They would pass over it and wouldn't look this closely or really see this deeply, what the artist is looking at and showing us. So that is a good example of looking closely at the form of something and not letting it be clouded by your perception of the content. So moving on, I just want to cover quickly iconography. Now, I'm not talking about the type of paintings that are religious icons, like the paintings that have the faces of Jesus or saints, but instead I'm talking about iconography in the form of just basically symbolism. When you think symbolism, that's what I mean right now. So it's subjects, symbols, and motifs used in an image to convey its meaning. So an example of this is some image that has a mother and child. It might actually mean Mary and baby Jesus. Oftentimes a lot of these are religious, and let's actually look at some religious symbolism here. So this is some Christian iconography. you can see it's jam-packed with symbolism. There's these winged figures as angels. God is holding this orb that represents the world and how he has the world in his hand, in his care. And the Holy Spirit is represented as a dove. Mary wears a crown to show her royalty and holiness, and a sort of authority over people as well. I mean, a gentle authority, but still an authority, being a ruler. Also, the cross itself is a signifier of Christ, and this scapular garment is something that is like symbolic in Christianity. So there's a lot of just symbolism and iconography in this work of art. This is the Circle of Diego Quispy Taito, and I probably mispronounced Quispy. Like I said, I'm trying my best. But yeah, moving on. Also, Asian traditions also use a very rich iconographic language. This is not only Christianity that does this. So, for example, this is a wooden sculpture of the Buddha. And some of the symbolism in here is the top knot, or the bun on top of his head, symbolizes his enlightenment. The long earlobes show that he was once a wealthy prince before he sought truth. So basically in the story of the Buddha, he was a very wealthy prince when he was first born, and to show his status, he had these fancy gauges in his ears that stretched his earlobes, and later in his story, he has taken those out to walk the middle path, but his earlobes are still stretched, which shows the story of his past there. Also walking the middle path, his garment is quite simple, very humble being, and his hands are folded in a traditional position of meditation. So that's also has that iconography of the importance of meditation in the Buddhist practice. And also the lotus flower throne symbolizes that enlightenment can come in the midst of life. And lotus flowers in general have this very, honestly, to me, it's quite beautiful, the symbolism of something very beautiful and pure being able to emerge from the muck. Because if you think of the way lotus flowers grow from like muddy ponds, but they become so like pure and clean and white and not all muddy when they actually bloom. It's just showing that this beauty can come out of less than beautiful situations. Now, here's an example of a contemporary artist that is mashing up and quoting various traditions and various symbols and iconography and putting it all together into something quite unique. So some of the iconography here is this frame. It's very ornate, detailed, it's gilded. It would normally surround a precious painting. And there's also, in the image within the frame, there's these scanned photos of jewelry or bling, this idea of glamour and excess. And there is also this saltire, which is that X-shaped motif in the middle of the piece that is commonly found in flags and crests. And that goes into why it is named Saltire Compton. This is by Rashad Newsom. But yeah, that's an example of someone taking multiple traditions and mashing them up and creating something new. So now let's move on to chapter 2, which is the purposes and functions of art. Once again, this might be a bit intuitive, like you might already understand that people make art for these reasons, but I think getting into some examples can make it a bit more interesting. So let's just power through this. So art forms as a result of meeting deep and subtle needs as a society. It's generally for public purposes, not for the personal goals of the artist, although art can be for the personal goals of the artist. People generally will disregard that, call that art therapy, but it can be. But truly great public art does come from wanting to fulfill a purpose for the public and not just for the artist themselves. Art in its social and cultural context has 6 functions, and I'm going to get into all of them. And also, they could address more than one need or function per piece. So the first function of art is designing for every day. Here you can see Eva Cecil's So Spot Sauce boat with ladle. Goodness, I can't talk. Okay. Eva Ziesel's sauce boat with ladle on the left here, which she is quoted as calling it a playful search for beauty. And then on the right is George Nakashima's conoid chair, which is a radical shape to a common seat. And you can see that both of these are using, the artists are using their skills to take something that is plain that everyone just needs for everyday life. You need a chair to sit in, you need a bowl to eat out of, but they're elevating it to make it a more aesthetically pleasing experience for those who are lucky enough to have that in their living space as opposed to a plain chair or a plain bowl. Also, another function of art is embellishment, and that goes into daily, like embellishing day-to-day objects and items that we keep in our life. Society definitely values artistic embellishment of everyday things. A good example of this is our cell phone cases. I'm sure a lot of you have a plain cell phone case, but a lot of people have a decorative cell phone case, even though it's not necessary to keep your phone safe, just because we value something that is aesthetically pleasing to us, something that we find beautiful or that we think expresses ourselves and our sense of style. So there is definitely an urge to make all of the things around you have an artistic message or expression about yourself. Like, what does it say about you that you have a sparkly phone case as opposed to a marble phone case? I mean, not real marble, but like the pattern. Anyway, so let's look at this example. This urge to embellish, it motivates creativity. So people get creative just because they have this urge to make the things around them be decorative and be embellished. And here's an example of that for a blanket. The Yoruba people often did resist dyeing of cloth to make these blankets. The resist dyeing process is kind of cool. It's basically you put a resist on a fabric. Oftentimes people will use hot wax and let it cool, but there's lots of different things that you can use to resist the dye. And you paint that on anywhere that you don't want the dye to take. It'll still take lightly, like you can see there's still a light blue there, but there's definitely a distinction between where you put the resist and where you didn't. And then you dye the entire cloth and then take it out and take the resists off, and then you have this negative space in whatever design that you put the resist on there. So this is an example of that from the Yoruba people, and that is an example of how people embellish a day-to-day item like a blanket. Another example, but on a larger scale, is the embellishing of architecture. So shelter is a basic need. We all need that, although that need is not being met for everyone. But the idea behind embellishing architecture or making something aesthetically pleasing out of architecture is that architects and designers can make surroundings distinctive and make a certain aesthetic experience that you have while living or being inside of that place or being near it, looking at it. So it's truly like art that you can be inside of and live within. So it affects just the entire atmosphere of the setting in which you're living your life. So this example is a building by Frank Lloyd Wright, and it is the Hollyhock House in Hollywood, also known as the Barnstall House in Hollywood. I'm honestly proud of myself for not stuttering. The Hollyhock House in Hollywood. But the design scheme here is based on repeated hollyhock flowers. That's why it's called that. But that's an example of architecture fulfilling that function of art as well. Another function of art, and one that people, I think it's probably the most popular function of art, is for visual delight. Delight is often seen as a principal goal of art, although I personally love ugly art. I love art that is not delightful at all to look at because it makes you feel something or it makes you think about something. But a lot of people think that art should be beautiful and art should be delightful to look at, and it should be a pleasurable experience. So this delight, it happens when we are captivated by a work of art, when we enjoy it aside from practical or moral or political considerations. We just enjoy it because it's aesthetically pleasing to us. And I keep using this word aesthetics. The word aesthetic has become really popularized in fashion culture and just internet culture, but a lot of people don't know where the term itself actually comes from. Aesthetics is actually a branch of philosophy. It studies how and why artworks are considered beautiful. Nowadays, something is just like aesthetic if it's like has a certain vibe to it, like the cottagecore aesthetic, or this is like an emo aesthetic or something. But it's actually a long-standing philosophical train of thought of why is this considered beautiful? What is beautiful about it? What is beauty? And getting into that question of what is beauty, I mean, who can define that? But the book does, and it defines beauty or something beautiful as something that is pleasing to the eye and agreeable to the mind. And what is beautiful varies widely across cultures. Things that are beautiful here might not be beautiful on the other side of the world, and vice versa. So here's an example of idealism, which is beauty that's found in something that is ideal or close to perfection. It's behind so much of the art created in ancient Greece. You know how I was talking about this constant flexing contest of who can make the most perfect, most realistic artwork? In Greece, it was like that, but it's like who can make the most perfect sculpture of the human form? They would put like muscles on male bodies that like the muscles don't actually exist in real life, just to create something like completely ideal and perfect. And that's basically the whole idea behind the Western canon, and especially Greek art, is just trying to make something that is so ideal that it is sublime to look at. And it can get really competitive of who can make the most ideal version of something. Here's a pretty tame example of this. This charioteer sculpture. It's from ancient Greece, but we don't know who the artist was. But it has a sort of balance and quiet dignity to it. You can see how there's definitely like this ideal proportion and this sort of calm, just striving for perfection. So that is idealism in art. Also, harmony is something that is very visually delightful for people. Harmony is a pleasing balance or harmonious proportions within a work. So this is Claude Lorrain's Ausanias shooting the stag of Sylvia. And it incorporates harmonious colors. The buildings are balanced by trees and cliffs. The light is diffused evenly throughout. There's just this very hazy, dreamlike quality. And actually, an interesting fact, the term picturesque actually started referencing this specific artist. So back in the day, if someone said that's picturesque, they literally meant that looks like a picture made by Claude Lorrain. So he was so famous that the entire word picturesque originated just because people thought that his pictures were so beautiful that they would use that to describe like scenery or mainly just scenery. But so that is one example of something that is very harmonious and visually delightful in that way. Harmony is also highly valued in calligraphy and porcelain plateware too. These are two examples where you can see the harmony is just the main feature of what makes this art what it is. For both of these, there's so much emphasis on the balance and just the perfect, clean balance of pattern. And I feel like I'm saying the word balance too much here, but it's very much about balance, at least in these two pieces. Another purpose or function of art is art for communicating information. So art is often used to impart information and ideas. If you think about back in the day before photography, artists and illustrators were the only source of information about visual experience. It's like if you think about like scientific illustrations, before photography, the only way to know what a pair of human lungs looked like is because someone actually like sat there and painted or drew human lungs on like a specimen of an actual dead human so that the rest of the world could know for science. Nowadays we can use photographs, but artists used to be the only way to communicate to the rest of the world things that we normally couldn't see with our naked eye. And through that, artists have the power to shape the way people understand their world, and also the way that their specific culture is viewed by other cultures. Art for communicating information, this purpose is often used for storytelling as well. A great deal of art tells stories. They can be personal, moral, or historical, or oftentimes these stories are religious or mythological. This is an example of a painting that recounts a mythological story. This is Titian's painting of Bacchus and Ariadne. Yes. Bacchus and Ariadne. But you can see this is definitely telling a story here. But there are less conventional ways of storytelling, and some storytelling through art tells stories of everyday life, and that can help broaden perspective and show how others live. So this piece in particular, Autoconstruction Suites by Abraham Cruz Villages, this is about the artist's home life. So all of this disorder, all of the different levels and places to explore within the art where you can physically inhabit, it is about the artist's home and about the artist's family. And clearly you can see that this artist must have a very chaotic home life. So that is another way of storytelling, but on a more personal level. And getting into even more personal storytelling, this photo series, Man Reading Newspaper from the Kitchen Table series by Carrie Mae Weems, you really get into the personal life of these two people here. It's very intimate. It's like you're actually in their home. It's almost as if you're seeing something that you shouldn't be seeing. It's voyeuristic. But you're able to get the story of these people's personal, intimate moments in their home life, and have a peek into that from the outside through these works. So that's a very personal form of storytelling. Another function of art is making commentary on things. Because art is a language that is easy to understand visually instead of writing, it's a good way to convince people of things. And many view art's primary purpose as communication, and they use it to communicate what commentary they want to make. So for this example, this is Gin Lane by William Hogarth. This is an etching and engraving, but it exposes the horrors of excess. It's basically Hogarth is trying to tell us not to drink too much as a society, or else we will descend into madness. And the more you look, the more you see in this piece. I mean, there's this woman with her breasts out, and then the child is like falling off the stairs. There's someone starving in the front, and there's people brawling in the streets. There's trash being thrown from the ceiling. There's children gnawing on bones. There's someone hanging from a noose, actually, in the background. So it's basically just saying, like, don't drink too much as a society, or else you're all gonna go absolutely crazy, and this is how bad things can get if you do. So that is a form of social commentary through art. Another form of commentary, this is CF000668, fun title for a piece, by Chris Jordan. This is a photograph of a collection of litter found on the beach. So this is using art to inform viewers about human impact on the landscape. But that's also another way of commenting, using art to make commentary. Another purpose or function of art is for commemoration. So many monuments in the ancient world, and also in the modern world, have a commemorative function. For example, the Taj Mahal was made to commemorate the ruler's favorite wife. Also, this royal portrait figure by the Cuba Peoples of Congo, we don't know the artist's name, and honestly, I'm willing to bet that we don't know the artist's name because this artifact was most likely stolen. That is a big issue in museums today, and that's something that we can talk about more later in class. But this represents Shyam the Great. It's basically immortalizing someone that was considered great in their community by putting them into the form of a sculpture so that they can be remembered. It's commemorating. Another example is memorials. So this is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial by Maya Lin. It bears the names of 60,000 servicemen and women who died or are missing from the Vietnam War. And this is on a much larger scale, but if you think about it, I mean, even just a gravestone could be considered a commemorative work of art. Moving on, another function of art is art for public and personal expression. So self-expression has become increasingly one of art's most common functions. It's become a lot more popular to make art that is self-expressive. And expressive art functions when the artist conveys information about themselves, whether it be their personality, their feelings, their worldview. But it is increasingly popular for people to make art that is just expressing themselves. Some of the most self-expressive work of the 20th century comes from the painter Frida Kahlo. She is amazing. She oftentimes most of the time, uses her own body, like portraits of herself, as the subject matter of her pieces, but then incorporates these surreal elements that, couldn't actually exist in real life. She had a long-standing affair with Salvador Dali, so you can see the reference, like the inspiration from surrealism here. But this is very much a very self-expressive piece, and so much of her work is self-expressive in that way. Another example of self-expression in art is, this is Kandinsky's Composition 6. Kandinsky, in this piece, sought to reach out to viewers by beginning with his personal feelings. So this is really just the artist expressing himself, and people were drawn to it because of just the grandiose size and colors and detail that is in it. People became interested in just the way that this artist was feeling just because he made something visually pleasing out of it. Another example of not self-expression per se, but expression nonetheless, are totem poles. Totem poles illustrate crests or legends associated with a family's history. So this is like expressing something not from just the artist, but from the artist's whole family. And this is a totem pole by Bill Reed, who was from Haida, from the Raven Wolf clan of Tanu. But yeah, it's another form of expression, just not limited to one person. It's telling a story of an entire family. Another purpose or function of art is for worship and ritual. So many buildings that are intended for gathering are also very visually striking. Oftentimes, especially in Catholicism specifically, but also in so many different religions, you'll see that the buildings themselves are so intricate and beautiful. It's like the architecture was made to glorify their God, or to make you feel the Holy Spirit when you see it, just because it's so beautiful that it like gives you shivers or something, and that makes you feel like that's the Holy Spirit. So a good example of this is the Sainte Chapelle in Paris. When you look from the inside, it resembles a giant jewel box. The original function of the Sainte Chapelle was a storehouse for precious relics. So like the Pope's finger bone or something was like in a very fancy box in there. But yeah, you can see that a lot of art is made to make these worshiping spaces very beautiful. Another way to look at this, other traditions often focus their creativity on ritual tools instead of worshiping spaces. So for example, and this way of thinking is less about creating a space that makes you feel the power of whatever God you're trying to exemplify through that space, but instead using the creativity and artwork to make tools, to make things that can be used in rituals and in ceremonies. It's a different way of thinking of it, but it's another way that art has been used for worship. And also, there's this idea of just kind of vague spirituality that's not pinned down to one specific religion, but just spirituality as a whole. It often has to do with like appreciating the landscape or nature or the earth in general. But contemporary spirituality, it takes many forms, and some of them are assisted by art. So here are two examples. On the left is Ancient Light by Scheherazade Hushieri. And this is a more contemporary piece, and at first you look at it and you might just think it's a blue haze, but if you look closely, there's these very intricate squiggled lines all working together to create this piece. And then on the right is Sun Tunnels by Nancy Holt. This is more modern rather than contemporary. Those are two different movements or times to reference in art, but this is from the 70s. And this is an example of like the type of spirituality that really focuses on appreciating the earth and the landscape itself. And this lines up, if you look at it at just the right time, you can see the sunset through the tunnel. Another function for art is for political purposes. So art can be used to express political goals or ideals. Sometimes it's to persuade us to submit to an authority, but others use art to express protest or encourage revolt from authority. But the main element here that people are focusing on is persuasion. So this art tries to invite and urge us to do or think things that we might not have otherwise done or thought if we hadn't seen that art. So an example of this is one of many plaques showing the Oba holding leopards. It's basically the rulers of the West African region of Benin used these plaques, hundreds of them, to decorate their palaces. And not only did that show their authority in just the sense of how much time and care went into the decorations for their palaces, but also the subject matter on the plaques themselves expresses their authority as well, because you can see that he is holding leopards in his hands and has these fish coming out of his waist, and it's almost as if he rules over nature as well as the people. So it shows this almost divine authority of the political rulers of this area. Now looking at some political architecture, this is the United States Supreme Court building, and if you look at it, you can really see it's using art to express authority in a way. If you take a step back and think, if I was the architect of this, what am I trying to make people think about the United States Supreme Court when they look at this building? There's great strength and size in it. They want to show that it's that these people are educated and worldly because there's these Romanesque columns and all of this detailed work around it, but ultimately it's expressing the authority of the Supreme Court. Another image of the Supreme Court here, but this one is in protest. Protest art is generally when artists use art to involve themselves in the politics of the day. This piece is untitled, but also known as the Supreme Court painting. It's by Rodney McMillan, and it in particular was protesting against court decisions on voting rights and election districting. And then also, here is another artist I'd like to feature. This is Kathy Kolowitz. She devoted her entire career to art that took political positions. She made series of prints that encouraged workers and peasants to protest and struggle. So she was very interested in workers' rights and in poverty and in the fact that some can still work full-time and be impoverished and also be working in unsafe conditions and still be impoverished. Her work was controversial at first, but her reputation grew among artists. And also, Nazis actually forbid her from exhibiting in public, which honestly is a badge of honor. You know, you're doing something good if Nazis have banned you. But she continued to make prints despite being forbidden from exhibiting in public. So that is one protest artist I'd like to show you. Also, here is a self-portrait of her so you can see what she looks like. Now, for the end of the lecture, I'd like to go a bit rogue and look at some protest art that the book doesn't include. Just 3 pieces I wanted to tack on at the end. This is potentially one of my favorite pieces of protest art. This is Ai Weiwei's Remembering. And this is in protest of, so for background, there was an earthquake in China, and a certain school building was not up to code, and so many children died because of that building collapsing in the earthquake in a way that was much more catastrophic than it would have been if the building was up to code. However, the names of the children and the number of children specifically that died was suppressed knowledge from the public. The Chinese government did not want people to know how many children died. They wanted people to think it was like 200 children. Ai Weiwei put together a team of researchers and reached out to family members of those at the school and underwent this very long and grueling research process to try to identify just how many children died in that tragedy. And the number was over 9,000. Over 9,000 children died. And they wanted people to think it was like 200. So in protest, Ai Weiwei made this piece out of over 9,000 backpacks, each one representing one of the children that had died in that tragedy. And if you stand back and look at it in Mandarin Chinese, it says, "She lived happily on this earth for 7 years," which, I don't know, it just punches me right in the feelings. And I just love not only the amount of time and care that went into making the artwork itself, but so much time and care went into the research behind it in order to honor these children that were quite literally forced to be forgotten. Looking forward, here is "Do Women Have to Be Naked to Get into the Met Museum?" This is a piece by the Guerrilla Girls. It was originally meant to be on a billboard but was rejected, so they ended up making wheat paste posters of it on the streets, taking out ads on public transports, and perhaps most impressively, sticking it onto the windows and doors of the Met Museum itself and other museums. So the Guerrilla Girls actually went in and did some counting, did some math, and found that less than 5% of the artists in the modern art sections are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. So this is basically giving that information as a form of protest. I mean, you would think that just telling the truth and giving facts wouldn't have to be politically colored as protest, but in order to bring this information to light, they really did have to go guerrilla style, pasting their art everywhere. And I just think this is a great active protest art. And then, last but not least, I wanted to bring it to something more local, bring it home. So here is some protest art and memorial art found at Injustice Square Park here in Louisville. It includes, in the back, you can see Erin Conway's portrait of Breonna Taylor titled "Say Her Name, Breonna Taylor," but there's all this protest and memorial art put together, and I just wanted to include this to show that protest art doesn't have to be big and far away and lofty in concept and huge like Ai Weiwei's. Even though that's amazing, it can also be worthwhile just being something small on a piece of cardboard in a park here in Louisville. And I wanted to show that it is a part of our local culture as well. So that is all for today. I will see you guys in class, and I look forward to discussing this with you. Have a good one. Bye.